There was a young mother with 4 small children, and she decided that their summer vacation should begin with planting a beautiful garden. So she excitedly took her young ones to the local greenhouse where they could pick out some flowers, some beautiful plants that they could grow together. And there, for the next 2 hours, they squabbled over who got to push the cart. They insisted on seeing every plant in the greenhouse. They cried loudly when they found out there were no dandelions there, and they even broke a large clay pot. Home at last, she complained to her very patient husband, "All I want is some peace and quiet and some beautiful flowers." "My dear," her husband said, "I believe they call that a funeral." I don't necessarily know about the flowers, but it seems like everyone is looking for a little peace and quiet. You know, often retired folks will move into a retirement village where they can be separated from the busyness of young adults and young children. Or parents with kids still living at home, they'll fill their schedules full of activities and work, and yet dream of a time when things will slow down so they can get some peace and some rest. I mean, even teens, even kids, they feel the stress and the chaos of living busy lives. And they long, most of the time unknowingly, for the peace that order and rest brings. Everyone seems to be searching for peace, but we have a hard time finding it. However, we read in Philippians 4:7, "And the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." A peace that is beyond comprehension, a peace that exceeds anything we can understand, a peace that we can't even explain. That's what Paul's writing about. It's a peace for Christ followers, but how? Or maybe the question is why? Now, the truth is, I don't think those are the right questions. It's all about the who. Today I'm going to be talking about the peace bringer. We're going to look at a couple stories from the New Testament and see how the peace bringer brought peace, a peace beyond comprehension, to some people who definitely needed it. First, let's go to Capernaum in Matthew 8 and in Mark 4 and in Luke 8, where Jesus has been spending time healing and teaching. He's tired as he steps into the boat with the disciples on the Sea of Galilee. But let's view this story through the eyes of the disciples. They had been following him for a while now, this Jesus of Nazareth. You know, first it was the fishermen, Simon and Andrew. Then the brothers, James and John. One by one, he asked these men to follow him, and they left their normal lives behind to do so. Normal lives that seemed scattered all over the place, not just geographically, but in occupation as well. Yes, there were fishermen. Yes, there were tradesmen. But there was also a tax collector. And there was a revolutionary, a zealot. And those revolutionaries, they hated tax collectors, and they hated anything that had to do with the Roman Empire. But they were all together, and they had left those lives behind to follow him. And follow they did. Recently, their following had led them to Capernaum on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. There, they had witnessed Jesus heal people, also from many different walks of life. There was the leper that came and simply bowed down before him. And all Jesus did was stretch out his hand and say, "Be cleansed." And he was. Then the centurion came along, that stinking Roman. And not only did Jesus heal that Gentile son, he praised that sorry Roman for his faith. That one was probably a little hard to swallow for the disciples. But at least he was taking care of his own also. He did heal Simon's mother-in-law. I mean, she couldn't even get out of bed. Her fever was so bad. And all he did was touch her. And the fever left. She felt so much better. She got up and started serving them food and taking care of them like nothing had ever been wrong. But he wasn't just healing folks. He was also teaching. You know, he told the story of the farmer and the different kinds of soils. You know, not a lot of people understood that one at first. But I bet the disciples were glad when he pulled them aside and privately explained the meaning to them. He also talked about lighting the lamp and not hiding it, but making sure that everyone could see the light. They remembered when that one time when the guy came up and said he would follow, and Jesus said, "The Son of Man doesn't even have a place to lay his head." There's another guy who said he would follow, but he had to bury his parents first, and Jesus said, "Let the dead bury their dead." I can imagine the disciples wondered what he meant by that. But now the day was drawing to a close, and Jesus needs rest. He needs to get away from all of the needy people for a few moments. You see, even Jesus took naps. So they got in the boat. They headed across the Sea of Galilee. The disciples watched as Jesus laid down to rest and fell asleep. And they also watched as the horizon grew dark. Clouds began moving in as the winds began to blow harder and harder. And then the rain started. And the waves grew larger. I mean, you know it had to be bad when even the fishermen began to panic. You know, these were the guys who spent all of their lives in boats. Surely they wouldn't panic over some small storm. But panic they did. Because the storm was raging. Well, let's leave the disciples for a few minutes. Let's go over to Samaria, to a town called Sychar. Here in John 4, we find a woman at a well. Let's look at this account through her eyes, see a different kind of storm. It's about the 6th hour of the day, or as we would say, it was around noon, you know, the hottest part of the day. You may wonder why she came to the well to draw water at the hardest part of the day. Was it because she was an outcast? I mean, this woman had been married and left or divorced or widowed. We're not really sure. She'd been left by 5 men already. And she was living with another man who, at least up to this point, had refused to marry her. And you know, everyone in town loved to talk about exactly who she was. Possibly making up stories about this unloved woman who had been left behind by so many. Maybe noon, the hardest part of the day, was the only time she could go to the well and not have to put up with those sideways glances and the snickering and the whispering. Because, well, she'd had enough of that. But I can see her as she walks up. As she approaches the well, she notices, well, there's somebody else there. I mean, she's already out here sweating, carrying her pots. Might as well go ahead and do what she has come to do and take care of it. But as she gets closer, she recognizes it's not someone from town who knows her. It's actually a Jew that's sitting there. She probably thought to herself, oh, perfect. She might have escaped the ridicule from the people who know her, but now she's got to put up with some arrogant Jews because the Jews just know they're better than the Samaritans. They always looked down on them. Oh, and what's that as she walks up? He asks her for a drink. She's out here in the worst part of the day, dealing with all these insecurities, fighting through the anxiety, worrying about all the things that she has to do today. And this arrogant Jew just sitting here at the well near her town is going to ask her for a drink like she's got nothing else going on, nothing better to do. I can just imagine that the storm was raging. Well, let's head back over here to the disciples, where we left them in a raging storm out on the Sea of Galilee. You know, wind on land is one thing, but when you're out on the water and there's no trees, there's no buildings to serve as a wind barrier, that's a whole different area. That's a whole different animal. You can trust me on that one. And with high winds come high waves. The kind of waves that don't just rock a boat, but they come crashing over the sides. They fill the boat quickly. They're so powerful that they can take a wooden boat and smash it into splinters. And the rain, oh my, we're not talking about a light drizzle. We're not talking about the kind of rain where you put on a light rain jacket or grab an umbrella. No, when I think about this rain, I think about rains, where I grew up, they would describe them as a gully washer. Rain so thick and so heavy that the drains can't even keep up. And you see debris floating down the streets because everything's getting washed away. But there weren't any streets out there, and there weren't any drains out there on the Sea of Galilee. And I don't think umbrellas or raincoats were going to help them. All that the disciples were thinking about was devastation and destruction, the possibility of death. And you can just hear the panic setting in for the disciples. You know what? Before I continue with the disciples, a little side note here. How tired must Jesus have been to sleep through that? I mean, we know about the teaching and the traveling and the healing. To sleep through this, he had to have been completely worn out. And I see this as a little reminder that, yes, he was fully God, as he'll show here in just a moment, but also he was fully man, and he needed some rest. But back to the disciples and the raging storm and the panic. Each account from the three Gospels where we find this story, you'll read the word perishing to describe what the disciples were expecting if they couldn't get Jesus to wake up. They were thinking they were going to die. Yeah, the storm was that bad. Even the fishermen thought all hope was lost, and they were staring death in the face. But they woke Jesus up. And what does he do? He stands up, he steps in, and he simply says, hush, or silence, or quiet, or peace, be still. And it was so. Mark writes in verse 39, and the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. The storm was raging no longer. But there's another storm going on. There's another storm going on with this Samaritan woman, the woman at the well. And I can just imagine her seething. She's already dealing with this inner turmoil at the well when no one was supposed to even be here, and she's already sweating from carrying the water pots in the heat of the day, and this Jew has the gall to ask her to fetch him a drink of water. The nerve. She asks him, how is it that you, a Jew, are going to ask me for a drink? I mean, these are the same people who consider the Samaritans as less than, as half-breeds. They want nothing to do with him, but now, because he's hot, he doesn't have a bucket, he's going to ask for a drink? How dare he? I can imagine her thinking. And then, what's that? She hears him refer to himself as the gift of God. I mean, she had met some arrogant Jews in her day, but this one takes the cake. He says he's got living water. He doesn't even have a bucket. Not only is he arrogant, I'm sure she's thinking, but he's crazy as well. And then he tells her that whoever drinks of this water will never be thirsty again. That they'll never be in need of water. That they'll never be in need of more. What's he saying? That he has all that she'll ever need? And not only that, but she can become a spring of this water that provides all that is ever needed for anyone who drinks of it. She, this outcast, this unloved, this left over and left behind water, if she drinks his water, she'll never come up short again. And she can have something that others need. Maybe she was thinking, sure, let's have some of this water. Let's see if this really is all that you say it is. And she asks him for a drink. And he asks her to get her husband. I'm sure that was the culturally correct thing to do, to talk with her and her husband, but she doesn't want to get into that. That's personal. That's a mess. This stranger doesn't need to know about this mess that has caused this raging storm in her life. But what's that? He tells her he already knows. He knows about her past. He knows who she is and what she's done. But that's impossible. How could this stranger know? And why would he still talk to her? She's an outcast. Nobody wants to be around her. I'm sure she wondered to herself, why would he even talk to me if he knows who I am and what I've done? Well, they go on to have a conversations about Samaritans and about Jews worshiping. And he talks about a time coming soon when all Jews and Gentiles will worship God in spirit and in truth. She tells him about the things that she has learned. She tells him that she knows that one day the Messiah will come. And he says it. He reveals himself to her, this insignificant outcast of a woman. Here's Jesus say to her, I am he. This is the Messiah. The man she met at the well knows her, sees her. This Messiah, this Jesus steps in, and she could feel inside of her that the storm was raging no longer. Now, if you've ever experienced a terrible storm, you know that sometimes the aftermath of the storm is even worse than the storm itself. With trees and branches broken all over the place, homes destroyed, flooding happening. Some people even lose their lives. But the aftermath of these raging storms that we've talked about, well, the aftermath is quite a bit different. Let's go back to the disciples. They'd seen miracles before. You know, there was healing, sure. There was that time Jesus turned water into wine. I mean, there was a reason that they were following this great teacher. But they hadn't seen anything like this. Nature actually obeys him. That's crazy. Mark writes that they were afraid. Matthew writes that they were amazed. And Luke, well, he writes that they were fearful and amazed. They couldn't believe what they had just seen and what they had just experienced. And their only response was a mixture of fear and amazement. It sounds a whole lot like awe. They were in awe, not understanding what had just happened, but knowing that this Jesus, their rabbi, their teacher was so powerful, so awesome, that the only correct response was awe of who he was, because only God has this kind of power. I like to think that maybe, at least for some of them, this might have been the first time that it got through to them that this Jesus they were following actually had the power of God. Mark writes that they said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and sea obey him?" I mean, this type of power, that's reserved only for God, not some mere man. The aftermath of the storm the disciples experienced was the realization that Jesus is God. But what about the woman at the well? What about the aftermath of her internal storm? John writes, "So the woman left her water pot and went into the city and said to the people, 'Come see a man who told me all the things I have done. This is not the Christ, is he?' They left the city and they were coming to him." She realized that she just had to tell people. I mean, this man, the Messiah who had been foretold, saw her, knew her, and loved her. He had calmed the raging storm that was inside of her. And she wanted others to know about this. She wanted others to meet the Messiah, to drink the living water, to experience this peace that she now had because Jesus had stepped into her life. And what happened because she told the people from her town about the peace bringer? Well, John writes, "Now from the city, many of the Samaritans believed in him because of the word of the woman who testified, 'He told me all the things that I have done.'" She didn't go with them. She didn't go to them with some 5-point message. She didn't go with them with some great theological teaching. She went to them and said, "Here's my story. Here's what Jesus did for me. He told me all the things that I have done." So when the Samaritans came to Jesus, they were asking him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. Many more believed because of his word. And they were saying to the woman, "It is no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard ourselves and know that this one truly is the Savior of the world." She shared her experience with the peace bringer in the aftermath of her storm, and many more tasted the living water and experienced the peace that is beyond comprehension. That's who Jesus is. He is the peace bringer. This world is in conflict. It was created perfectly by a perfect creator, but sin entered the world. And with sin came chaos and pain, devastation and destruction, and death. All things that cause a lack of peace. But Jesus came so that we may have life and have it to the full. And full life includes a peace that goes beyond all comprehension. A peace we can't even fully explain. And he is working in and through his followers to restore order and peace to his perfect creation. Yes, his followers will face storms. Sometimes you will go through storms, and sometimes the storms will rise up in you. And when Jesus steps in, he may calm the storm you're in. And he will calm the storm in you. He is God. He is powerful enough to calm the storm you're in. There is nothing outside of his power. There is nothing that he can't do. There are no limits. And if bringing calm to the storm that you're in brings him the most glory and advances his plan and advances his will, then that's what he will do. But that's not always what's best for advancing his kingdom. Sometimes he gets more glory when people who are not Christ followers see you walk through the storm with a peace that passes all comprehension. And they wonder, how is that possible? It's because he calms the storm in you. You trust him. Your joy, your peace, your hope, they are not dependent on circumstances. You have those things because of who you have and who has you. Christ, the author, the finisher of our faith, the one who cleanses sin, the one who makes the darkness leave and brings life and brings peace. Jesus, the peace bringer. If you don't know him, you can't truly know peace. And that might describe you today. But you can change that. You want to calm. He wants to calm the storms in you. And you want the peace that passes all comprehension. You want the real life that is found in him. Come to him. He's waiting with open arms and he loves you. He wants you to experience life and hope and joy and peace in him. Admit you're a sinner. Believe that he died for you and rose again, not only to pay the price for your sin, but to offer you this new, real, peace-filled life. And confess him as Savior and Lord. And you'll be saved. And you will know peace. And I know that many of you here today do know him. And you know peace, or you have known peace. But maybe you don't feel peaceful today. I get that. I understand that. And so does he. He understands. And he wants you to come close. He wants you to snuggle up like a child on a loving parent's lap. He wants you to lean in on him. Share with him what's going on, what's causing that storm inside. Come in close. Be held by him. Yeah, he may calm the storm that you're in, but I know that he certainly will calm the storm in you. While the worship team sings, I encourage you, draw close to him. Let him give you peace that exceeds anything we can understand.